this next one, if I were to set this up, this would definitely be a Google search for me as well. So I'm considering setting it up, but luckily I don't have to Google search it because we're covering the show. And Chris Moffat is covering it, wrote it all up for us. So Chris Moffat wrote an article. He's been on Talk Python before, and he wrote an article called Using WSL to Build a Python Development Environment on Windows. So WSL is a Windows subsystem for Linux.
Okay.
And this is interesting to me because I just recently had this experience where I finally broke down and I decided I've been using Parallels on my Mac, and I have a super fast Mac, like a i9, with 6 cores. So it should be able to run virtual machines just fine. And yet still, when you're working in Windows, or you're working in any of the virtual machines, like even a virtualized Mac OS, it's still like the scrolling's a little bit off. Like the keyboard's just tiny bits of latency. There's just a little bit where it just doesn't feel good to work there, right? You can totally do it, but it's kind of, you can tell it's not as perfect experience. So I finally broke down and installed Windows in Boot Camp so I can boot into Windows and have a true native experience, or just keep booting into my Mac OS and have that, right? And that is a lot nicer. But one of the reasons I don't want to go to Windows is I really love the terminal in Mac OS, way more than even on Linux. It's just super nice. And some of the tools you have there are like in deployment on Linux machines. So you have this sort of closer to production world, but you have a nice OS with like GUI tools and little widgets and whatnot with Mac OS. And I was thinking, it's not really fair to Windows to like stick it into this little crummy system. So it's nice to have this other option, but I don't want to go there and do development because I don't have this Linux type system, right? It's a nice terminal. So what Chris talked about is basically how to set up Windows subsystem for Linux. And there's a new version that came out mid last year called WSL 2 that is a lot better, especially around file performance and IO and sharing and like crossing over between the Windows and Ubuntu or whatever you choose to run.
Oh,
do
cool.
you do this any?
No, I tried it really early on, and I haven't tried it since WSL 2 is out.
Yeah,
so
it sounds like it might be worthwhile.
Again.
If you look at this thing that Chris wrote, he talks about, there's like a little motivation of how it runs and whatnot. I'll give people the lowdown, but mostly it's like a step to a guide of how to set up the various things you want. So for example, if you want to be able to have a nice terminal on the Windows side, but then that can talk to the Windows subsystem, it talks about installing the new Windows terminal, which we already covered it recently. It talks about getting Ubuntu from the store, how to upgrade old WSL installations to like the version 2. Also, how you can set it up to use Visual Studio Code in Windows that is actually like working on the Windows subsystem for Linux. So like you fire up VS Code and you're doing your work, and then one of the environments you could choose is like a WSL environment that's actually running on an ultra lightweight version of Linux. So when you get the little terminal and VS Code and you type over there, right? It's running Linux commands, but on your machine still without a VM. Yeah. I mean, sort of a VM, but not really. It's like halfway between Docker and full VMs.
Yeah, this looks nice. So what I am usually doing is I'll have to try this out again, but I agree with you that I like to pretend I don't have Windows. But I do. I mean, my day job, I work on a Windows machine. So
maybe this is extra helpful for you because you're going to be there anyway, right?
Yeah, but I mean, so I've already worked around most of it. So I use Git. So Git for Windows comes with Git Bash command, which is you kind of have both of them. You can do Windows stuff and work around in Bash, and it sort of feels like a Unix environment. So
nice. Well, I'm very excited about the possibility of just having native feeling Oh My Z Shell on Windows.
Oh yeah,
that's gonna be nice.
Yeah, well, and I hope this is a direction that I think it is, that this WSL stuff is just more and more integrated with the rest of Windows.
Yeah, the integration's pretty sweet. So if you're in WSL, which is effectively like you're in Ubuntu, right? You can type Explorer on the terminal and it will open up the Windows Explorer in that folder, in the Linux folder, but it'll open up the Windows Explorer, the native you file stuff right on Windows and things like
Okay.
that. So the integration's pretty sweet now, which is what I was thinking is worthwhile. Also, to start up this WSL, it's like 1 second. So it basically feels like starting a sluggish terminal.
Oh, yeah, it's not bad.
Right. Then it's up and running, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is a really cool breakdown of how Chris is working and the various tools, like the various plugins for VS Code and how he configured them to make them all work together and stuff. So if this workflow sounds interesting and useful to you, check out the article. It's got a bunch of details and screenshots on how to do it, and it's not really worth going into those. But I think it's a cool idea, and I just want to give a shout out to WSL too. Thank you for watching this segment of the Python Bytes podcast. This video was made during the recording of the full episode. Visit pythonbytes.fm and get the whole story.